We are about to embark on an immersive journey through the corridors of our minds. Stand by as we prepare for departure.
Welcome aboard, everyone, to the Productivity with Peace of Mind podcast adventure. Our journey will begin in just a moment. Inhale deeply and exhale. Our voyage takes us on a captivating tour, diving deep into the intricate layers of our thoughts and imagination. Brace yourselves for the complexities of our evolution. For a safe and enjoyable journey, stay seated. Secure your helmet and protective goggles, and keep hands, feet, and legs inside while the ride is moving. Now relax and enjoy.
What if I told you you're more creative than you realize? Creativity lives within all of us. And the art of play provides such deeper meaning and fulfillment to our lives. And that's exactly what Tam and I are going to talk about in today's episode. So, whether you are a creative who's looking for more focus in your projects, or you're wondering if maybe there's more creativity inside of you than you realize, this episode is for you. So, without further ado, let's go to the conversation. I met Tam here in the beautiful state of Colorado, and the first thing that drew me to her was her incredible positive energy. And I've nicknamed her my jar of bubbles because she just always brings the energy and always brings the joy. So, Tam is a passionate Costa Rican computer science engineer who relocated to the United States in 2019. With a fervent passion for both technology, problem solving, love that, and art, Thamara personifies a unique blend of analytical prowess and creative flair. Love that. With an innate self driven interest for literature, languages, dramatic arts, and music since a very young age, she's embarked on a different artistic journeys throughout her entire life. Today, she prioritizes these passions to help balance her engineering job and enhance her self expression and mental health. Some of her current passions include writing, singing, mixing songs, and playing different musical instruments. So, we're going to dive into that today because that is one of the things that I loved so much about you. And we even talked about this where I immediately saw this creativity within you and this creative side, this strong creative side where, you had kind of said, "Oh, I didn't realize, that I had this."
Yeah, it's
So,
kind of funny. You pointed that out, and honestly, I hadn't thought of myself as a creative or artistic person in a very long time. But when I started kind of looking into the questions that you asked me and all of that, I realized that there's always been that side of me. And then for one reason or another, I just let that lapse a little. And I've been trying to reclaim that for a couple of years, especially actually since moving here and meeting you. So, yeah, I think that's been influenced by my friends that do cool things like yourself. So,
yeah. Multi-passionates are very definitely drawn together.
that's true. I've seen it a lot actually. I have a lot of friends who are artists, and I'm like, why do I keep attracting this into my life? And I
Yeah.
think it's because maybe it's a side of me that I had kind of forgotten to explore more. So I'm happy to be able to bring it back up.
Yeah. Yeah, and I do think that I feel like a lot of people out there may say like, "Oh, I'm not creative," or, I don't have a creative side. And I really do believe that creativity lives within all of us, and it's so important for a rich life. And so that's what we're going to get into today. All right. So tell us a little bit more about yourself and your background and kind of these, tell us more about these various creative endeavors that you've been interested in?
Of course. So, well, ever since I was a very small kid, I had this interest that was just, I guess, self-driven because my mom, my dad, they were not artists at the time. They were not musicians or writers or any of that. And then one day I came to my mom and I was like, Mom, when I grow up, I want to be an artist. And she was like,
Yeah.
Oh my goodness, that's an option. So nowadays she's an actual artist and I'm an engineer. So it's a little weird, you know? But I think it all started because as a little kid, I really enjoyed reading. I enjoyed poetry. I used to go to adults' parties and talk to people and then read them things off of books and,
Yeah.
enact certain things. So people were always kind of interested in this tiny little 5-year old that was so extroverted, I guess, and wanted
Yeah.
to talk to them and show them things. So it's always been a part of me, just like music. When I was, I think 7, I told mom, please, I want to go to music school. And she was like, all right, well, do that. And, it didn't come from anywhere because I was first person in my family to start that, at least my immediate family. And then it's kind of been around ever since.
And how would you say that you discovered, you know, that love for that creative piece, and did that journey of really realizing and becoming that multi-passionate professional, how did you realize that that's kind of where you were at?
Well, I think art has always been present in my life since I was
Mhm.
little, but I also studied design for a short bit. In high school, actually, I did a technical degree, which was 3 years long. And then after that, I went into psychology in college. So a little bit unrelated, but I still needed that creative outlet.
Yeah.
So music was always present. And then when I switched careers and went into engineering, I started realizing that everything was analytical, everything was numbers, and I really needed something to feel more like a well-rounded human, not just a
Yeah.
professional, but more so like I wanted to do other things that also allowed me to express who I really was outside of who I was as a work professional. So
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. I love the balance piece of that. And what would you say kind of sparks that, ignites that creative spark now for you today?
that's a good question. I feel that the inspiration comes from anywhere, like daily things, conversations with friends. Sometimes I read someone else's work and I get inspired by that. Sometimes, actually, a big part of what I write and what like songs I write or um, the part of my novel, like fiction novel that I've been working on, comes from dreams that I've had. So
Yeah.
I wake up and I'm like, oh, this would be good. And so
Yeah.
I just kind of incorporate it. So I would say it comes from everywhere, and I feel like every person that we encounter has a message for us. They have
Mhm.
something to teach us, and I'm always willing to listen. So I feel like that inspiration can be from anywhere, really.
Yeah, and I love that piece where we can actually go out and find inspiration in everyday life, like in conversations on the street, in all these interactions that we have. I love that idea of just kind of drawing from all these different places. That's really cool. And what about a time where, like a moment when a new creative project brought an unexpected wave of joy? Because I want to kind of talk about where creativity has this place for us where we're not necessarily needing to be always productive or needing to get something done, right? We always want to accomplish all of these things, but there's this side of it where it's kind of play and it's kind of fun and it can bring in joy, but also a little bit be, meaningless, where it doesn't have to have a purpose other than just our own joy in life.
Yeah, I agree with that. It's funny because you've brought this up before. I am the kind of person that wants to do so many things and wants to accomplish so many things. But every once in a while, I've felt like there's not enough enjoyment in what I'm doing
Yeah.
because it's all oriented and focused towards a professional goal, for example.
Yeah.
But a good example of this was actually helping my mom because she
Mm.
wrote her own poetry book and she
Yeah.
published it herself. And she showed me her little book cover, and I was like, "Mom, she's a painter. She had this beautiful painting, and it was like displayed tiny on this in the center of her book." And I just told her, "Mom, this painting should be the main
Yeah.
piece, and like you can barely see it there." So she just said, "Oh, I just don't know how to do this, and somebody's
Yeah.
helping me, but they're not necessarily, like this is not their focus." So I said, okay, well, let me take this on and let me try to help you.
Yeah.
And I honestly don't call myself a designer, and I did this just for love. But I was very excited with how it came out because I felt like it made a better job at showcasing her beautiful art. So
Yeah. Oh, that's so cool. I love the family dynamic and being able to support each other through your growth and as you kind of grow through. So, we have a very different relationship with family as children, but then as adult, we get to kind of have that more, playful and growth space
yeah.
with our parents. So that's super cool. So, as a multi-passionate individual, how do you balance all of those different pieces? Because I know we talked about the writing and singing and whenever other, passions you want to talk to. How do you balance all of those?
I think it's a little hard sometimes, to be honest, because I am the kind of person that will try something at least once, and then if I don't succeed immediately, I still try again just in case.
Yeah.
So, part of what I like to do is prioritizing,
Yeah.
because I have so many things going on that sometimes it becomes hard to say, "Hey, I really don't have enough hours in the
Yeah.
day, and I probably won't have enough years, to even
Yeah.
do that." So what I like to do is kind of weighing priorities and saying, "Okay, this right now seems more important to me."
Yeah.
And it really changes and varies depending on the time. So I've really learned to listen to myself and say, it's okay, whatever I'm trying to focus on,
Yeah.
even if it's silly, even if it doesn't, seem like it's gonna yield a result or, sometimes, like you just said, it's just about having fun.
Mhm.
So, that has also been a struggle for me because at some point I thought, "Hey, everything I should do is career driven, it's oriented towards my professional life and so on." And that's when I started feeling like I was a little depleted out of energy
Yeah.
because I didn't have enough fun, so to speak. So I think that's the whole key is listening to yourself and realizing that sometimes it doesn't have to make sense. You just have to enjoy it.
Right. Well, and I know so earlier in the year when we were doing our goal setting workshop, you had talked about different, passions that maybe when you try it, and something I always focus on is the understanding the why. And so you had talked about when you start something, it might actually come more naturally to you, but then you might not stick with it because it's not actually bringing you that joy or satisfaction. So really understanding why when you're going in, and then also reevaluate, like, is this something I still want to do? Is this something that really is accomplishing that higher level goal or that higher vision that I have for myself in my life?
Yeah. Yeah. You say that, and it's interesting that I was just thinking sometimes I haven't enjoyed something because it's not challenging enough, which
Yes.
is crazy, because
Yes.
things should feel easy. But every once in a while, I'm like, okay, like, I tried this, it's fine. Now I'm moving on to something else. But yeah,
Mhm.
I definitely think all of those things tie together.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I mean, if we're not being challenged and we're not having to figure things out, the brain can get bored.
Yeah.
And so you're right. It sounds counterintuitive to, want something more difficult or want something more challenging, but life is all about solving problems. So I love that approach. All right. So when we look at kind of, all of these different ideas and hobbies that you have, how do you then stay focused on them? So let's look at like how you bring them across the finish line and you have an idea, you are clear on why you're doing it, you start it, you enjoy it and you want to continue it. How do you bring longevity into that?
It's a good question to ask, that, especially because I know that you're a finisher. You always go through the finish line. And I'm like, I'm a started. I have all these things going on.
Yeah.
And then rarely ever do I get through that finish line as well. But I would say that when you really find something that you love, that you enjoy, sometimes you have to power through.
Yeah.
Some days you're just like working out and so on. Some days you're just not that inspired or that motivated. But if you really have a purpose in what you're doing, you kind of make it happen. So,
Yeah.
and that's been mostly the case with the things that have somehow stuck with my
Yeah.
hobbies,
Yeah.
because throughout my different stages in life, I've had different things that I just really enjoy that I look back now on. And I'm like, oh, that was fun, but I'm not really missing it, you know?
Yeah.
And I think that the things that have prevailed, like music or writing and stuff like that, really do because they give my life more purpose.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Tell us a little bit more about some of the projects that you're doing and how you kind of enjoy the journey along the way. Because I know, we've talked about different ways to kind of keep it interesting and keep it fun. And so, when you look at that longevity piece, how do you keep yourself motivated? What do you do for yourself to keep that front of mind and front and center for your brain so that you have those kind of signals and triggers to keep practicing, keep honing in a new skill or whittling away at a project or whatever it is you're working on.
yeah, I think that's very important, as you've mentioned, that, sometimes you just have so many things going on that you lose focus.
Mhm.
Um, I think once you set goals, what I like to do is I break them into smaller pieces
Yeah.
to make them a little bit more manageable
Right.
because otherwise I have too many things and I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, this is overwhelming. I don't know where to begin. I don't know
Yeah.
how to go on. But at times when I've realized that I'm stuck in something, those smaller little pieces help me progress further. So other than that, I think surrounding myself with the kind of people that are
Yeah.
either working on similar goals or working on similar projects always inspires me. For example, knowing that you're writing a book too, I'm like, oh, it just feels good to
Yeah.
be in good company with people that you trust, that you know that are inspiring you as well. And that if, I have some trouble with something, I know I can go, hey, let's see. There's
Right.
this issue. And I know either maybe you've gone through it or we can brainstorm together, which is something I really enjoy.
Yeah.
So those are probably the main things that I do when I have this specific goal and I have a specific project that I want to work through and I don't necessarily know what to do or where to begin or how to continue. So
Yeah. Yeah, and the importance of community really, like, you can't under understate it enough, right? Like, you can't, I mean, you can't overstate how important that really is because having other people to brainstorm with and call and say, "Hey, I'm kind of stuck here," or "I need to brainstorm an idea over here. What do you think?" And, bounce ideas off, whether it's, you and I on the phone or we're, doing a whole, workshop together with a group of friends and really bringing the brains together to find that solution. So what about your inner voice? What would you say, where would you say the inner voice plays its part for you as far as on that journey?
that's a great question because if I look back, I feel like I've muted that inner voice a lot
Hmm.
throughout my career and in
Yeah.
the past, whether because I wasn't getting enough support on the things that I wanted to accomplish, either my caregivers or my partners at the time or whatever. So I know that in many occasions I neglected that and that intuition, that
Yeah.
ability to listen to myself, and obviously it's come back and bitten me after. But I think now, and one of the things that I've been practicing for over a year now is yoga plus meditation. And
Yeah.
I know you know that you've been an instructor, you know exactly what I'm talking about. But I feel like I knew that that existed and I was aware of it, but I never really wanted to start it because I don't know if I was a little scared of what I was going to find or something.
Yeah.
Or, it's just become so popular and I feel like a lot of people are on it for the wrong reasons.
Yeah.
Or not, maybe not the wrong reasons, but different reasons in the goals that I had. So,
Hmm.
but, eventually I found the right place, the right instructor, the right mentors as well. And that has really helped me kind of quiet down and listen to
Yeah.
myself. So,
Yeah. And I really do feel the more that we can listen to that inner voice, the clearer and louder it gets.
mm,
Right.
yeah, I agree with that. Absolutely. I feel, yeah, exactly. Because, if you've told yourself enough times that what you're thinking or feeling is not, it shouldn't be put out there, then you really never listen to yourself again, right? Same thing happens when you tell a little kid don't do something and then eventually it takes longer for them to even want to reconsider it. So I feel like our inner child is kind of a part of that as well because once you heal that about yourself, you can go back to being that same creative person that you may have been in the past. So
Yeah. Well, and it's a good way too to really improve our relationship with ourselves, right? Our confidence goes up. Like when we listen to that voice inside, or when there's something that we want or we want to do, and then we go do it, there's so much power in that,
yes,
because our trust in ourselves goes up. And guess what? When our trust in ourselves goes up, our trust in the world goes up, right?
that's true too.
The confidence and that foundation that we can build within ourselves, it becomes even more powerful when we build that community, and we go out into the world, and those connections we have with others is so much stronger.
Absolutely.
So now talk to me about how we can bring this fun and creativity and play into a workplace, even if, or especially when, our workplace is not that creative.
Yeah, that one's always a little bit challenging. It also depends on the crowd, right?
Yeah,
Because
yeah,
you can bring something, but if most of the people in the room are not interested, it's a little bit harder, you know? And you
yeah,
just said it, it's not as fun or as enjoyable if it's not around the right community.
yeah,
But I've always had this, I don't know, there's something kind of silly about how I approach certain things. I try to joke about them. I try to kind of make them a little bit more lighthearted.
mhm.
So in the past, for example, I used to draw memes for work. I had this, like my very first job was a help desk. So we had calls all day. And then back in the day, it was like those line memes that were so funny that just look like prehistoric now. But yeah, so I started doing that, and my coworkers were interested because the majority of them were younger, So I actually got included in the newsletter and my little comic strips and stuff. So I feel like when you incorporate humor, other people will kind of follow along too, because I sometimes it takes one person to break that ice, and then more
Yeah,
people start becoming interested in being more expressive and being more artistic, for example. So those have been things that have helped me in the past. I would say I still occasionally do the funny Photoshop or the funny meme, although that's probably not something I prioritize nowadays. But yeah, I think that's been experiences that I've had in the workplace that have been successful and people have actually embraced them. So,
yeah. I love that. And when we look at a workplace, you mentioned if the environment is not quite what you want it to be, or it's not quite the people that you want to be around, we can change that. But sometimes that takes time. So what could someone do for themselves to make their work more fun and exciting, even if other people are not on board?
great question. That's a tough one too. I would say, at least in my experience, in every job that I've had since, I've been working since I was 13 years old to,
Hmm.
pay for my school.
Yeah.
So I feel like at some point you find someone that is similar to you, either
Yeah.
there's an interest in common or something. So you kind of become friends with that person, and
Hmm.
that is probably easier. I would say the community part is very important, because I
Yeah.
feel like even if you're a visionary, if you have nobody following you, then it's not, your message is not going to come through. So yeah, I think definitely trying to find the right kind of people to
Mhm.
support your initiatives, or sometimes I've had conversations with my managers. I'm like, hey, I feel like maybe we can start an activity, or we can do like a
Yeah.
weekly something, that's not work related, just so that people feel like we're humans and not just machines.
Right.
And I've also had managers that started that themselves, and I think that's where that idea came from. But yeah, I think eventually you find your people and it becomes a lot easier.
Yeah. Yeah. And it can take time, but it is important, I feel, to really understand what it is you want, the type of lifestyle you want, how you want your everyday life to look like. And then from there, you can build your professional life. Because if you want this spaciousness or time to yourself, or you want, more time with people, different careers are going to show up, on one way or the other. And so really making sure that what you're doing isn't aligned, like the actual, job and projects themselves, but also the people, like making sure, I feel like so many people go into interviews so like, are they going to accept me? Right. Are do they like me? And you're asking, it's more externally reliant.
Mhm.
Whereas if you go in and you're like, do I like them?
Mhm.
Right. And be more discerning and be more cautious on, we are going to spend a lot of time with the people that we work with. Are these people that I'm going to be better from, be challenged by, grow with? Right.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And to that point too, I think finding a mentor at work is also very
Mm,
positive
yeah.
because sometimes you have to build your own path, right? Nobody's going to
Yeah.
come to you, or sometimes they do. Sometimes they come to you and they're like, "Hey, this is what I think you'd be great at."
Yeah.
But generally speaking, most of us don't have that luck. So
Yeah.
if you find out what you, and then again, this comes back to listening to yourself, if you find out what you want to do, what you would be good at, or what you want to learn, then you can actually and actively pick those people that can inspire you, that can guide you through these things. And sometimes it can be a manager. I've had managers and leaders that have guided me through my path. And sometimes it's a coworker, sometimes it's someone who doesn't even work in the same department.
Yeah.
There's always someone that you can learn from and that you can get inspired by. So
Absolutely. I love that mentorship piece. I think that's so important. Is there a time that, just sheer joy became the driving force behind a project or something you were working on?
actually, yes. I started writing a fiction novel last year,
Mhm.
and it was just because I felt like it.
Yeah.
I at some point I did have a different kind of motivation, which was I wish I had been able to read some of these things
Mm.
many years ago when I was going through some of these scenarios, but I also thought if nobody reads it, it's fine too. I just want to put it out there and
Yeah.
see what happens. So that's been for sure part of it. And going back to when I was a little kid, I wanted to learn music and I just don't really know where that came from. I just said, okay, I want to play an instrument. And my mom was like, yay, okay, so yeah, I think it's a bit harder maybe to find those things that make us that happy just out of, there's no other reason, but it also ties back to listening to yourself and
Yeah.
really paying attention to what your intuition is saying, what your creative side is saying, and so on.
Yeah. And, a time when that inner voice and that intuition becomes so critically important is through challenges because difficult times, we can't avoid them. They're inevitable. And there's, I always like to say struggle is unavoidable, but suffering is a choice. And so, what would you say for how we can get through some of those challenging times and keep that joy alive? Not in like a toxic positivity way of, oh, I'm happy when I'm not, or trying to be happy about something that's not really, something that makes us happy, right? Like, we don't want to fake it because life is about duality and we have the good and the bad, and we can savor and appreciate both, right? And that depth of the differences. But what would you say, just in general, keeping the joy alive through some of those challenges and kind of having that right attitude and approach to some of those difficult transitions?
Great question. Well, like you said, it's not about struggling, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes you just gotta let it go. And I've had,
Yeah.
the sunk cost fallacy has happened to me that I'm like, oh, trying to attach to something because I'm like, I gotta do this. And then
Yeah.
it's not working out. And I just realized, hey, I've wasted all this time, energy, efforts, they're gone.
Yeah.
They're gone. So I
Yeah.
better focus on something that I actually
Yeah.
enjoy, that I actually get pleasure out of doing, But I also, and I think this kind of goes back to what we mentioned earlier, I've also found things that I'm immediately good at, and I'm just
Yeah.
like, it's fine. I feel like, and this is not to say like I just want to try and fail all the time, but a little bit of that extra effort goes a long way because I feel like it's somehow even more satisfactory when you can say, hey, I accomplished this. I've been doing this for a whole year and I can finally do it okay,
Yeah.
So I think we are kind of accustomed to that mindset of things should be quick and should be easy. And especially, I can say this as an immigrant that moved from a different country. Our pace of life in this country is really accelerated.
Yeah.
So at times we just want everything to be done, ready, and just go. And when I go back to Costa Rica, I feel like time slows down a lot. And
Mhm.
I've learned now that when I'm kind of running around and feel like I don't have a purpose for what I'm doing, to quiet down, calm down, again, go back to that mindfulness. But really, the question is, do I really want to do this? And as you mentioned
Right.
earlier, why?
Yeah.
Like if you start with the why in so many things in life, you're gonna get much farther than if you
Yeah.
never question it and you just say, "Hey, I just want to do this." So, it's a balance. Again, I would say if you're just struggling all the time and suffering and not doing well, maybe just that's not meant for you. And if something is way, way too easy that it doesn't even feel enjoyable, then maybe also don't focus on that. There's somewhere in the middle you're gonna find something that you just love, even if it's hard, if it's difficult. And I guess one last thing that I thought about the other day, I saw something really nice that said relationships are they take work, but
Mhm.
not work like labor, but
Yeah.
more like the work that an artist puts into their painting and their
Yeah.
art. It's like effort, it's conscious time and inspiration. So it should be the same with the relationship with ourselves and the things that we want to do. So a little bit of effort will go a long way. It can't all be that simple, it's just like relationships aren't that simple. But if we know and we have the right reasons to be in it, it becomes a lot clearer, I would say.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. And I think, the piece about knowing the why and having that kind of greater vision of like, I'm going here and here's why, it's so much easier to hang in there when things do get tough. And, to your point, you may also realize, oh, this isn't actually what I want.
Yeah,
And that's okay. It's okay to quit the things that are wrong for you. It's
100%.
what's not okay is to run away from the things that really are for you and that you really do love, but you're scared of the discomfort. That's where you're failing yourself if you give up. So I love that. Thank you. So now talk to me about how being this, multi-passionate, creative, very interesting professional has added more depth to your life. And you kind of alluded to this earlier where, being a creative and being a multi-passionate, adds so much more. So tell us more about that.
Well, I just think that every person has a story. Every person you meet can be a lesson to you. Sometimes it's not the best lessons, but you get something out of it.
Yeah.
So many times we think about these encounters or these interactions as just transactional, at work.
Yeah.
But I've also come to realize that when you build more meaningful relationships with the people that you work with, for example, to the point that you can be that self, like yourself in front of them, it goes a long way, right? So you can pretty much inject a little bit of your art, of your creativity, of your enthusiasm, and inspire people with it. So I think if we just think about our jobs as something we do when we wake up and then come back and that's it, and we're not leaving a meaningful imprint. I mean, for some people, that's fine too. But if we're doing something so many hours of our day, we might as well add a little bit of ourselves to it just to enjoy it a little more. So
Mhm.
I would say that's probably what keeps me kind of interacting or adding these interlacing, I would say, these little things with the work that I do to the point that I've found also opportunities to write for my job and blogs and
Yeah.
content and knowledge articles and so on. And to me, that's very fulfilling because I know it's not just going to help me. My manager had a really cool phrase of saying like a one to many type of impact because you write it once and then there's going to be many, many people even from different sides of the world and
Mm.
different companies that have
Yeah.
access to your content and they say, hey, this is very helpful.
Yeah.
So that also inspires me because I've realized that if we're good at something and we want to share that talent with the world,
Yeah.
there will be opportunities even at our workplace. So,
Right. I love that intertwining of it because it is possible and not always for everybody. Sometimes we have to make a shift to make it possible. But I do feel like there's always little ways to kind
mhm,
of find that overlap
yeah.
and bring that creative side and that fun side and things that we're personally interested in into our professional careers.
Yeah, honestly, I look back and there's been a couple of times that I'm like, I don't know what I could have done differently, you know? Honestly, that was one of those jobs that I just needed to power through. And
Yeah.
then, but then at the same time, I had some kind of creative outlet that will still make me feel connected to myself and feel like I have more meaning or more purpose than
Yeah.
just, the professional stuff, which I really care about. And I've sometimes been a workaholic and I've had all these little things,
Hmm.
but I also feel like the times that I've felt more fulfilled are the times in which I've combined the two things, at least
Yeah.
outside of work. I still had something going on that kept me kind of inspired and doing other things.
Yeah. And would you say that having a variety of interests makes life more joyful and fulfilling? Because I feel like some people may, have some negative feelings like, oh, I just can't commit, or oh, I'm
Mhm.
interested in too many things and I can't stay consistent in one or the other. But I think there's a big value in being multi-passionate and having so many interests. So do you feel like that brings, kind of that more, fulfillment and joy into life?
For me personally, it does. I've also been called like I have friends that call it collecting hobbies. For me, it's
I love
and I think I've done that too. I've
Yeah,
had moments in which I just try a bunch of different things, and I'm like, yeah, none of these are really that enticing. But
yeah,
again, it comes down to committing because you can't commit to 100 different things, right?
right.
But there's going to be things that speak to you more than others.
Yeah,
And those are the things that you probably want to invest more time and energy into and focus a little bit more. So even for the times that I've had a lot of experiences and or experimented with many different
yeah,
new things, I have always had a primary thing or a couple primary things that I say this is something that I need to continue doing, even if I want to do 100 other things. So
yeah.
sometimes these are more like goal oriented. Like, for example, I learned how to swim last year, which for a Costa Rican and an adult my age, it's crazy to say, but I was like, this is a goal. I need to learn how to swim. And then I was like, well, that's not necessarily fun, it's just a
Yeah,
skill.
yeah,
So in the meantime, I was still going to music lessons and doing
yeah.
other things that I was like, I'm gonna continue having fun and also working towards bettering myself in other aspects. So
Right, and I suppose it's also it's not about, just chasing the next thing and doing it very unintentionally, right? Like, it's not like we probably lose the value, like, and I can see where someone may, feel like it's not so valuable when it's just, oh, kind of just chasing the next thing and chasing that next shiny object without having a lot of intentionality behind it. But when we have that strong why of this is like knowing what we're doing and why, it becomes so much more meaningful to us because
yeah.
we're exploring the different things in life where, it's almost like a buffet, right? You're like,
Yeah.
I'm gonna taste this, I want to taste a little bit of this. And
Yeah, yeah, that's actually a great point because sometimes I've explored things that seem unrelated, but
yeah,
then I'm like, wait a minute, if I do this with this, then like I can kind of tie these things together. So it flows that way. And sometimes it's completely unrelated, right? I
yeah,
can't be writing while I'm swimming, but I can be thinking about song lyrics or a part of my book if I'm swimming. So
yeah.
in a way, those little moments of inspiration will still hit us regardless of what we're doing if we're still doing something that we enjoy. And then other times we have to focus on doing things that maybe are not necessarily that enjoyable, but we have to do them because they're part of fulfilling those goals. So sometimes we need to have the funds to
Yeah,
be able to do these fun
yeah,
things, and
yeah,
then sometimes that comes through a job that we are not in love with, or and so on. And especially I feel like in those situations it's all the more crucial to focus on doing things that do bring you joy, because otherwise you're just walking around like a zombie and not really having any fun at all. So I've also had periods of my life in which I worked full time, I studied full time my engineering degree, and I didn't have a social life. I was barely sleeping. I was like, ah, goal, you know.
Yeah.
And I look back, I don't necessarily regret the way I did it, but I think that, again, balance, and that was not something that I was good at back in the day. And that's why that book I'm telling you about, I'm like, there's little things, little bits of information that might help someone that might be going through something like that. So
Yeah. And I would even, go as far to say that the variety of our interests and the things that we go out and learn and experience and explore really do make each of us, myself, you, and anyone listening to this, uniquely ourselves, because you're bringing your own unique recipe of everything that you've done, learned, and experienced to each new endeavor, project, position, career, business, whatever it is you're doing. You're bringing your own unique flavor because of that, right?
that is so true. Absolutely. I honestly constantly get amazed by how many things I've learned in completely unrelated scenarios that are helpful
Yeah.
on something that I'm like, oh, like for example, my mom's example with her book, I was like, oh, finally, I can put the sign to use for someone that I love and that I
Yeah.
care about. So yeah, I think that those moments will always come to us as well.
Yeah. And why do you believe that creativity is so important for living that, rich life, rich and meaningful life?
I think I can say that because I've had the extreme opposite,
Yeah.
And when I did, I didn't feel like myself.
Yeah.
I was
Yeah.
just like a robot, like a zombie
Mhm.
just walking and waking up and working and then going to bed, and then it was like the rinse and repeat, and I just felt like I was wasting my time, but not even because the job I was doing was fine or whatever, but I just felt like there had to be something else, right? Like
Yeah.
there's so many things that you can contribute to society with, like, and sometimes you don't have to create something. You can just help someone with something they're doing and so on. Like my manager is a big proponent of volunteering, because he says if you have talents, bring them out to the world.
Yeah.
There's somebody who can benefit from that. So yeah, I would say that's part of that. I've gotten inspired by many people who have ideas too, and I have really realized that my life feels better when I'm doing something where I'm using both sides of the brain, so to speak.
Mhm.
So
Right, because we need that, logical, analytical, tactical piece of life, or we'd never get anywhere,
yeah.
right? But we also need the joy and the fun and the creativity, because without that, it becomes boring. So I love that balancing piece, and really exercising both sides of the brain. So, for anyone listening who may be struggling with all of their interests and passions and things that they're, working on, or even if they're just dreaming about it, what advice would you give them for really maintaining? And the word balance is funny, because for me it's never, exactly a 50-50. It's kind of like a teeter totter. Like we're
Mhm.
constantly managing what, where our focus goes. But how do we kind of, work with keeping that focus, but also the joy? What advice would you give them for anyone struggling with all of their passions?
I want to highlight what you just said about it's not a 50-50, right?
Yeah.
Because if you just think about it as such, then you start again analyzing it too much.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, it's all about listening to yourself. You have to really feel what's working, what's not working, and then sometimes you got to make decisions based on that. And sometimes it's not, the decision that you would want, but you have to learn how to prioritize, right? Because you, again, don't have enough hours in the day to do all of these things. So,
Mhm.
what I've done in the past is I really do wonder what is working right now, what is not working,
Mhm.
and how can I better the things that aren't working if I
Yeah.
really want to continue to pursue those things. And if it becomes a matter of, like a black hole for my time and efforts and
Yeah.
energy, I just eventually say, "Hey, it's fine to drop it," like,
Yeah.
I've had a conversation with another friend once too, because she's like me, she likes to do 1,000 billion
Mhm.
things, and she's so intelligent, and she's always so motivated,
Yeah.
but once she told me, I'm getting drained, and I feel so exhausted because I don't know if I should do this or that, and then what I told her was, "If you don't wanna do that, then don't do that," you know?
Right.
I know it sounds, like, obvious, right? But I was
Yeah.
like, "Who's forcing you to do
Yeah.
that?" And it shouldn't be like a have to, or like I need to. If you don't want to do something, unless it's for work, in which sometimes we don't get a choice, then nobody's dictating that. So if it's not something that you're excited to do and you want to put in that effort and
Yeah.
that work into it, then just drop it, like,
Mhm.
don't. I've had my parents and people around me that have certain expectations of certain things, and at some point I was like, hey, this doesn't really make sense, and also at some point I maybe didn't have enough support in certain things, but I said, hey, this is what I want to do, so I'm just going to do it, so you
Yeah.
find a way eventually. And sometimes they have to be paused and you have to wait a little bit until you have those funds to do the things that
Mhm.
you want to do. But and then again, that's where the job is important. That's why sometimes even if you don't want to do certain things, you have to do
Yeah.
them.
Yeah.
But in life, the things that we spend our free time on should be things that we consciously enjoy, right? If it's not an immediate yes, then it should be a no. So
Yeah. Yeah, I like that. And how would you say that we can find our own balance and what that looks like and feels good for us?
that's probably one of the hardest things to do, because again, we have to train ourselves to be able to listen, because
Mhm.
we can say, hey, this is what, but I feel like a lot of times I've had to question things that I've been doing for so long
Mhm.
because they're part of who I am. And
Yeah.
then at the end of the day, they're not. So I've had to go back, and I'm not saying everybody should do this exercise, although it would be helpful sometimes, but I've had to go back and say, hey, why am I so stubborn about this particular thing? Like,
Yeah.
what is going on, right? Like, what really is going on? And then I've realized maybe it's an impulse or a reaction or a programmed behavior that back in the day I started because I needed to survive or
Yeah.
whatever it was, So and that's getting more into like the psychology of the
Yeah.
matter, but I really have found that in certain occasions, even I'm doing something that's actually trauma driven and not really something that
Yeah.
I want to do.
Mhm.
And those have been shocking realizations because I'm like, "Oh, I thought this was part of who I was. This was part of my personality. This was part of whatever." But
Yeah.
at certain point, you have to question and say, "Hey, I'm not really getting joy out of this. So why am I so attached and so stubborn and trying to make this happen if it's not really happening?" So I would say again, listen to yourself, and listening to yourself is a lot easier when you have healed those sides of you that were preventing you from listening to yourself. So sometimes we need to seek external help, like the therapist or someone talking to a friend at times can be helpful too. But really kind of that introspection of learning why or where certain things come from has been very helpful for me to let go of certain behaviors or
Yeah.
certain hobbies or things that I was so determined to do that were not really bringing me anywhere or giving me any joy. And when I say bringing me anywhere, like taking me anywhere, I mean more like as far as like fulfillment, not
Yeah.
like, oh, like a goal that I had or
Right.
something. It's more like I'm just wasting my time at that
Right.
point, and that's our only resource that is finite. So we should just focus on the things that really bring us joy and bring us that kind of fulfillment.
Yeah. Well, and that's a great point because it is, we can get stuck kind of in our ideas of what we've already invested time into, or, I've already spent money and time and effort and energy on this thing, but it might not fill us up anymore. And being able to recognize that as a sunk cost, it's done, it's gone. Those resources are used. We can't go back, but we're going to lose more if we don't let go of it. If we don't let go of it when it's not truly filling us up. And that, by the way, creates more space for the things that are really meaningful to us. So that really is kind of the secret to making the space for what means the most to us, because it's so great to go out and say yes to a bunch of new things and try things and, open yourself to that creativity. But then we can't forget to then on the other side say no to the things that aren't working, that don't fill us up, that you're like, okay, I tried it, it was interesting, and it's not for me. And then you keep that room for that new spacious energy for the new things, or the things that really do matter to you and really do fill you up.
100%, yes.
Okay, so tell us, Tam, what are some of the things you're working on now? What are you most excited about? Tell us a little bit about some of your projects.
I feel like I've been dropping little breadcrumbs.
Yeah.
I have been working on a nonfiction novel since last year, and I've also been focusing for the past few years in getting back to music,
Yeah.
which I feel has always been my passion and my roots and my ever like forever love, I would say. My
Yeah.
first and one true love as far as, well, I love many art disciplines, but I feel like music is the one where I can find
Mm,
the better ways to express that,
yeah.
and, writing as well. So songwriting is something that I'm also very interested in. And yeah, so I've been going to music lessons, different instruments, also like vocal lessons. And yeah, I've been trying to stay consistent with those things that are
Mhm.
my primary,
Yeah.
and then a few other things on the side that kind of come and go, but those
Yeah.
are mostly my passions that I've been trying to focus on lately.
Yeah. Well, that's super exciting. And if anyone wants to find you, how can they get
Oh,
in touch with you?
well, I write on Medium a lot. I don't really remember my handle because I just changed it last week. I think it's my name spelled backwards, so it's ARAMAHT.
So what we can do is we can drop that in the show notes so
Yes,
that you can
better
go
idea.
follow her on Medium, check out her writings. I don't is Medium a place where you can comment and interact?
Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah, for
you can
sure.
leave her a
I would love
message
to
there.
hear your thoughts. So, well, thank you so much for having me, Lindsay.
Thank you, Tam. It was wonderful to have you.
Thank you.
Thank you for braving the inside of your mind with me. The better we understand ourselves, the more deeply we understand the world, and as our awareness grows, life just gets better and better. If you've enjoyed this episode, please take a moment to leave a review and share this with anyone else you think could benefit from listening. A quick reminder that the content shared in this podcast is for informational purposes only. I am not a licensed therapist, and the discussions here are not a substitute for professional advice. If you're dealing with a specific issue or need personalized guidance, please consult with a qualified professional. Your well-being is important, and this podcast is simply a platform for sharing insights and experiences. I appreciate you spending this time with me. Until next time.